Adam Conover, you created and star in Adam Ruins Everything on truTV, which finished airing its second season this past April. Now, as you were preparing to go into season 2, how did you want to evolve and grow the series in its second year?
In last year's show, well, we do because we are writing new episodes right now that are going to come out this fall. But yeah, talking about the episodes that came out in 2017 and early this year, we first of all, we always uniquely for our show do a storyline every year where the character of Adam sort of goes through something, has to learn things himself. And so we had our most complex storyline we've ever done, where Adam falls in love and also leaves, his constant companion Emily, Axford, his friend, and sort of starts traveling around a little bit. And those are sort of a place and a situation we've never seen Adam in before. And also we did something that I'd wanted to do for a very long time, which is that we did a corrections episode where we went back and looked at previous topics that we had done and talked about how we got them wrong and what caused us to get them wrong and how we would have done them differently in the future. That's something that had been a goal for ours for a very, very long time. We were really excited to be able to do it.
What kind of preparation went into that corrections episode, and how much digging did you do into your past work, or how much did you find out about what could have been clearer, or maybe what was information that was missing or that you had to clarify or correct?
Quite a bit of work went into it. We had first of all, there were things that I already knew that I wanted to cover, right? So one of the things we talked about was how our act about electric cars, a lot of electric car fans seem to misunderstand the point that we were making. And I ultimately came to believe we should have made the point more clearly. And so that's what we talked about in that segment. That was something that I knew I wanted to address. There were also other issues that we came across because we have a different research staff than we did 2 years ago. We have staff turnover like any show does. And so we just asked our staff, hey, you guys have seen every episode. Which segments do you think we got wrong, right? And those new staffers said, well, when I saw this, I knew that, this thing wasn't the case, et cetera. One was when we talked about how the TSA doesn't really stop terrorist attacks. We say, what does stop terrorist attacks? Well, there's been a lot of other security improvements added, like reinforced cockpit blast doors, stuff like that. And also the increased presence of air marshals. And one of our researchers was like, well, hold on a second. I know about air marshals, that air marshals actually are an extremely wasteful program that do very little. And which was not something that came up in our initial research. So we did a new sort of segment, little quick minute on why the air marshal program isn't very good. So it was a combination of those two things we already knew we wanted to do, and things that we said to our research team, hey, go back and look at our previous episodes and you tell us, what did we get wrong?
And the corrections episode also included a bit of a segment on the backfire effect,
right?
About how providing facts can actually make people double down on their myths and misconceptions.
Right.
For a show about the truth will set you free kind of show, and we find out no, the truth will make you even more beholden sometimes to what you're wrong about in the first place. How do you kind of progress from that and try and navigate that?
Well, I get asked questions like this a lot. How does your show survive in a, fake news, alternative fact world, when people are all worried about those terms? One of the encouraging things about that backfire effect segment was we talked to a researcher who studies the backfire effect, and at the end, he gives us tips on how to avoid the backfire effect. And it's, the point is not that it's impossible to correct people. It's that you have to do it in the right way. And so he says, for instance, you need to replace the old story the person knew with a new story that's even more compelling. And you can't just, correct them once and you have to speak to their wants and fears and dreams, and emotions. And we realized that's something that we actually do on the show. We sort of independently discovered in our early episodes, the method that we use turns out to be a big part of the recipe for avoiding the backfire effect that we sort of stumbled into, right? And so I feel very lucky that I sort of figured that out without knowing what it was that I was figuring out. So what we really do is, and I think kind of uniquely among shows that are in our lane, is we're not just trying to own people and drop the mic, you know, and say, you're wrong, we're out, bye-bye, we did it, right? Which is, well, that's what a lot of shows do. And I understand why, because arguably that's the funnier thing to do, right? But we don't do that. We try to think about, I always try to put myself in the position of the person at home watching the show. And I try to think of a couple different people. And I say, how is this going to read to them and to where they are in their lives? And how is it going to strike their ears? You know, especially when we do divisive topics, right? I don't want to just speak to someone who's like me. I want to speak to people all over America who have different life experiences and different philosophies and different political affiliations. And how are they going to take this? And I try to imagine what are their interests and how do I best speak to those simultaneously. And you can never get everybody. You know, it's not a matter of, you know, I've had to give up the goal of making every single person on earth like the show. It's never going to happen. But I really do think hard about, how do we spread our message to as many as people as possible? How do we change as many minds as possible? And you really can do it if you use empathy and understanding, and if you speak to people respectfully as adults while making jokes. It works pretty well. We're always getting better at it, but that's our goal.
Yeah, and of course, you know, in terms of replacing a person's false narrative with a true narrative, you know, that's, you know, as you say, built into the fabric of the show with, you know, the format. It sort of goes from, you know, disillusioning people and then building them back up again in the end and saying, well, here's how the truth, you know, can empower you and strengthen you in the future. Yeah.
Right.
So it really does feel like and that does give us the empathy, because you are empathizing with the person who is suddenly having all of their ideas kind of dismantled in front of them.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's the goal of the show, is to help you empathize with that person. You know, we call them the Mark character, the person I'm talking to. The reason they're there is to be as an audience surrogate, right? And so for you to watch, and your reaction will probably mirror theirs, or we try to, you know, imagine that's how most people are reacting. Seeing someone go through that process of having their beliefs challenged, and seeing how they react can sort of set up how we hope the audience will react. And the message at the end of every episode is, here is how knowing the truth will help you in your goal, right? I really believe that knowing the truth is always better, and knowing the truth can help solve problems. And so that's what we're trying to get across.
And as you mentioned, the segment on electric cars was controversial. Were any topics in season 2? You know, did you get any pushback? You know, that you felt like, oh, maybe we could have attacked that better, or maybe even some people, you know, rebutting things that, you know, they were actually really wrong.
You know, there's a couple. There's always things that I look at the show very critically and try to figure out what we can do better. You know, there's a kerfuffle because we did in an episode about Columbus, we said the phrase Columbus never set foot in America, right? And what we didn't quite understand is that there are people in you know, Central and South America who use the word America to mean, you know, North and South America as continents. And Columbus did set foot on those continents, kind of. He set foot in the Caribbean, which I guess he would consider part of the continent, you know? But so it ended up being sort of a very America-centric phrasing to them. And it's sort of like, you know, for those people was a little bit like, hey, you know, we're a little insulted, you know? And so I always want to avoid things like that. That's sort of a smaller example, though. You know, it's funny. We did a lot of really hot button topics. We did formula feeding versus breastfeeding, which was we figured would be one of the hottest topics we've ever done. You know, you talk to sort of like mothers who know that area, they know it's very heated. And you know, the response we got, there's a little bit of, you know, some people were a little cranky about it. Bad word. Some people were a little heated about it, but you know, ultimately, I think it ended up starting a lot of really good conversations than anything else. So. Yeah, I mean, we did segment on redlining, which was one of my favorites, about how the history by which Black Americans were prevented by federal law from buying homes in certain areas and were thus excluded from the huge trend of wealth generation that was caused by home buying after the Second World War. And they were systematically excluded from it, and how that disadvantaged them in ways that we still see to this day, right? And that got pushed back from, racists who were like, no, Black Americans were never disadvantaged by this. That's stupid, and they were just mad about it because they're racists, and they don't like people pointing out that racism is real. But that segment had a much greater impact than most of the other ones that we had. Despite having a little bit of pushback in that way, so many people saw that and said, "Wow, I didn't know this. I had no idea about this history and the way that this affected our fellow citizens." And I'm gonna, and they're gonna carry that knowledge with them. So that's the most rewarding thing to us.
That episode about breastfeeding versus formula, that was part of the Adam Ruins having a baby episode. That was actually the second season premiere, and it was actually the episode submitted for the show for best nonfiction writing at the Emmys this year. What about that episode? What about that episode? Especially to start the season. What about that topic especially interested you to really launch into season?
Good question. We always look for those topics that are fundamental to American life, human life, that are stages that we all go through, that people have very heated opinions about, and where there's a lot of habits that we have that aren't based in science and fact, right? So that's why we've done things like, weddings, for instance, is a great topic for that reason. That's one that we did in the previous year. Having a baby is a huge one in that way, where it is such a hot area for so many people. They have the kid and they're like, they get bad information from every source. Like everyone's yelling at them to do this or that. They feel like the parents feel under pressure. And a lot of our message of our show is often, don't worry so much, right? Everyone's telling you have to do it this way or that way, but these options are fine. Do what you need to do, right? Don't freak out. That's often one of our sort of meta narratives, and that's a place where people really need that. They really need that, to hear that when they're having a kid. So that was one of the goals as well. And honestly, it was just one that our writers' room was excited about. I'm very proud that we have we have a goal, and we have hit most years the goal of having a gender balanced writing and research team. Or at least having a very large staff of female writers and researchers. And that was an episode that they were excited to do. We had a female writer and a female researcher on that episode. They had a lot of thoughts about it that we wouldn't have had if we, didn't have that element in the room. So I was also very proud of it because it really validated our staffing philosophy as being something that was worth doing.
Towards the end of the season, there were 6 fully animated episodes of Reanimated History, where you tackled different myths throughout history. What inspired those, and how were those to produce compared to the normal live action episodes?
Well, what inspired them was that we did our first all animated episode as part of the first run that we did in 2017. And it was a Magic School Bus parody where Adam's going throughout history and telling you things that you learned wrong in school. We talk about Christopher Columbus and ancient Egypt and grammar in that episode. And that episode, people really loved it. It was very, the fans really enjoyed it, and it was a lot of fun to do. And, our show is extremely time consuming too. We write and research the hell out of the show. It's 4 full days of shooting, and the show is doing so well, the network wanted more. And we discussed and we said, hey, a way for us to do more episodes of the show would be if we did some animated ones, because I don't have to be on set for those. And we can sort of have those, make those while I'm making the rest of the show. And so it really was, came out of the success of what we've done so far. And so we came up with this new format, Reanimated History, because we really, really enjoy doing those history episodes and telling you, here's what you don't, here's the true story behind the history you think you know. And we really enjoyed breaking that new format and telling new kinds of jokes, telling new kinds of history stories we wouldn't do on Adam Ruins Everything Proper. Yeah, they were a blast to do.
And your character in those Reanimated History episodes was sparring with the narrator for this these
Right.
history, played by Chris Parnell, that was narrating those. Well,
Oh
what was it like bringing him on for those? He seems like the perfect voice for that kind of thing.
He was so perfect. I mean, it's one of those situations where, a lot of times when you write, you imagine your fantasy person who's going to play the part just to help you write, so, let's imagine it's Patrick Stewart, because that'll help you, just conceive of the character and, this type. Right. And so we wrote Chris Parnell in that way, because it's that sort of like, that sort of pompous character that he does that's also easily undermined, is such a funny comedy character. And then we were like, well, let's go out to him. And we were so thrilled when we got him. We ran out of our office and go, oh, we got Chris Parnell, it's great, and I've been a fan of his for so long. And I, the first day of recording, we recorded a lot separately, but the first day I was in the booth with him and we were going back and forth. And he was so generous and wonderful with his time. And he's just one of those people who, you ask for, hey, Chris, can you just give us that line 3 times? And he gives you 3 different reads, all of which are different, all of them perfect, all of them work great different ways. And you're just like, wow, that was amazing. So yeah, it was really, really a joy to work with him.
And those Reanimated History episodes ended with, a segment at the end, same time, different place, where
Right.
we're exploring a lesser known aspect of history, not even one that's misunderstood, but not even really well known at all. And it's fascinating, to me, how many things that happen in the globe that, watching these segments, I'm like, why isn't that a movie? Why isn't that a movie? You get
right.
So many biographical biopics in Hollywood, and there's so many
I
stories
know.
that are just unknown. What surprised you the most about those?
I mean, it's exactly what you said. The number of stories that just people haven't heard. The story of the history of Haiti is so remarkable. Just the founding story of Haiti, where it was a slave nation, right? It was a nation of slaves who rebelled and took back their, took power from from their colonial masters, right? And like started a new nation. I'll be honest, it's better than the American Revolution as a story, just like as a movie. You know what I mean? It's like an incredible, like it should be a movie. And we didn't even have time to go into then the really remarkable history of how the colonial powers then took their vengeance on Haiti and really, really impoverished it in ways that, it's still dealing with today, that honestly, culminating in the disaster that happened there a few years ago. And the fact that it was hit so hard was because the country had been systematically impoverished by the nations that it was sort of under the heel of. But the story is so good, and that's the incredible thing about history, is that it is just overflowing with these stories. You can never run out. And yeah, it's like, it's sort of weird. Like, why is everyone trying to option, a new podcast when, hey, you can just crack open a history book, man. Like, and that's really what I do. Is, as a comedian, I sort of noticed, well, there's, so much comedy about the news, but where's all the comedy about history, about science, about philosophy, about, about language, right? There's this whole area of incredible stuff that we can explore that I was like, why is nobody doing this? Oh, I can do it, right? I can just start doing it, and that's what I did. And that's what brought us to where we are today.
And, do you have any plans for season 3 that you could talk about? Maybe more corrections, more Reanimated History, anything like that?
Well, we're writing the episodes right now. I don't want to spoil what the season premiere is going to be, but I will say it's a topic that is so divisive that we always said in our room in the past, we will never do this topic because no one will ever, the audience will not be able to put their biases aside and listen to the facts, But this year we're like, you know what? We are really good at writing this show. We can do it. We've gotten really good at it, and now we're ready to get into it. And then beyond that, we definitely want to do another correction type episode. So look for that. We're hoping to. And then we just always look to top ourselves every episode. We always say, what haven't we done yet? What kind of story haven't we done? What story haven't we told with Adam? What format haven't we done? What situation haven't we seen? And so we look to top ourselves every single time. And yeah, I think that's what you can expect to see.
Well, I want to congratulate you on season 2 of Adam Ruins Everything and season 3 coming up this fall. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Hey, thank you so much for taking the time. And hope people, Emmy voters, drop us a nom. It wouldn't be, hey, I'm campaigning. We did a whole segment on how award shows, you have to campaign for them, and you have to sort of like have a big marketing budget and stuff like that. And we want one as much as anyone. We're just sort of upfront about how we're doing it. So, I saw you at the Gold Derby party the other week, and, we've got billboards all over town, and I'll just be real upfront and say, like, hey, toss us a nomination if you think the show deserves it, because I'd sure appreciate it.
And I actually did see some ads in New York. I see them all whenever I'm in LA. I see them everywhere, but in New York they're much rarer. And I actually saw, truTV. It's like, all right, let's make this happen, Emmy voters.
Yeah. Come on. Right.
Well, thank you so much. And best of luck, and to any Emmy voters watching it, you heard it here first.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. Good speaking to you.